Hello, my name is Tom Sherrington. I'm the head teacher at King Edward VI Grammar School in Chelmsford. I also blog as Head Guru Teacher. My talk was about the value of action research in the school and the rigour that the CamSTAR group has brought to our work. Thank you for coming. I know there's tough competition for this slot, so I'm the kind of, not the 7 myths, I'm the 7 truths or something. Anyway, I'm going to talk to you about a specific process that we're engaged with at my school, and really to give you, hopefully give you the flavour of what it might look like in a school where there's a research engaged culture, and some of the features of that, and consider some of the challenges that we face in terms of making our work more rigorous when you've got every single teacher in a school involved in research of some kind. And that's the idea, and hopefully, you know, I'm posing some questions as well as just telling you stuff. Right. It's one of the reasons I went to my school in the first place. It's a grammar school in Chelmsford. And I never worked in a grammar school before. I never thought I particularly wanted to either. But the thing that attracted me to KEGS was that they promoted this idea of being a research-engaged learning community, which sounded very grand. And it was the basis of their a bid to be a leading-edge school as part of the Specialist Schools Trust, so that they became a leading-edge school on the basis that they were a research-engaged learning community. And still on our sign outside the school it says, KEGS, a research-engaged learning community, and we think that's quite an important thing to promote. And what it means is that every teacher in the school is engaged with research in one form or another. And we talk about that in different ways. We've done various audits of this. We've had some formal surveys that we've been asked to do over the years about the extent of our research engagedness. And we've been forced to think about whether we mean engaged with research or engaged in research. And actually both of those things are important and they're different. So it's important to be engaged with research. Other people do the research and we read it. So the school is very, you know, we do have a lot of people who read the books and share and discuss. You know, we have a lot of discussions in the staff room about the latest thing from, you know, so-and-so's books just come out. Tom Bennett's books are all over the staff room and that sort of thing. Although it's, like any school, it's not universal. You know, it's pockets. Some people are interested, some people don't engage at all. So the engaged with research is patchy, but there are enough people talking about what's going on outside the school to fuel other people. So we talk about, we cite research when we're talking about, when we write up our projects. You know, there is a culture of trying to make our work have that kind of academic process behind it. It's supported in some ways by people. A lot of people at my school have done PhDs and MAs just by chance in a way, we do fund people to do an MA. So if anyone ever says, can I do an MA or a PhD, we always pay half the cost. That's a standard sort of response. Because we think that we get benefit from that, and it's much more rigorous than day after day after day of CPD on the course. You get a lot more substance and also a lot more buy-in from those people because they feel phenomenally supported. So in terms of value for money, paying for someone to do a PhD or an MA is good value. So we have that. We also then talk about it being engaged in research. And this is the main thing I want to talk about today. We're talking about getting a situation where teachers feel that they're doing research as part of their CPD. And that's the name of that's one of the blogs that I wrote about this, which is the title. You know, it's a two-way thing. Research as CPD. So actually when you were planning a training thing, if you can constitute a CPD activity as research, it gives it a kind of structure, a formality, which means that you're looking for more rigorous outcomes than just trying stuff. But also, the CPD does become research, which is shareable and communicable to other people. So by doing, if you're looking at your training as a way of finding out answers which can then be shared, you're also doing research by doing your training. So let's see what we've done so far. Now, one of the things, the ways that we do this, is we have an outcome, a product, and we find this really helps to create this sort of sense of being a research engaged school, is that we have a publication. And this year, actually, we're going to turn it into a blog, because now blogging is, we've kind of cracked the idea of what a blog is and how many people will read it. But for the last 5 years, and these are all on our website, you can see them all, there's about 30 or so of these learning lessons. So this was something which predated me. We've updated the way it looks and so on, but there are every half term, roughly, we put out a publication called Learning Lessons, and sometimes it's written by one individual person, sometimes it's a summary of a few people's ideas. The most recent one was somebody interviewing other teachers about their stuff, and then it was just reported, and it was quite nice because it was written like a dialogue with those people. What did you find out and how did it go and so on. And these are hard copy things around the school. We should put them on, but they're all on our website, so people can download them as PDFs and so on. We're going to move that into a blog this year, so we have the Learning Lessons blog site, which will mean that you don't have to wait for every half term. People might just do little micro blogs about one-off lessons or little small things. These tend to be slightly bigger projects. By having Learning Lessons, though, as a physical entity and a product, it helps us as a vehicle to say, we are doing research and we're sharing our findings, and it's embedded in the school culture. So this is a flavour of the sort of thing. So, for example, dialogic teaching is something which, I could talk about CamSTAR in a minute. Dialogic teaching was the first concept that all the schools in CamSTAR worked on together. It's an idea which is promoted by Robin Alexander from Cambridge. And it's fascinating. I mean, just to tell you what that is, it's where you set up dialogues in the classroom. Instead of sort of doing the classic scattergun questioning in the classroom, and you go, yeah, what do you think? That's interesting. Oh, what about your opinion? And did anyone disagree and all this? You just zone in on someone and you say, right, that's interesting, and what about that? But did you think about this, and what about this other idea? And you go deeper and deeper with one person, with everyone else as an audience. And the theory is that generates a higher level of, a deeper depth of understanding of a text, because this is from English teachers primarily, than the scattergunning, because you're making every question is challenged, essentially. And that's the student will prepare for that dialogue in advance. They'll know they're going to be the target of the dialogue. It's not like this, they're just... and you also have to classroom environment where everyone else will listen. So that's dialogic teaching. We've done a few things on that. And that's spread out across the school, and that's a thing we refer to now. So at KEGS, people will talk about dialogic teaching as a thing, and a lot of people will know what that is. Co-construction, I'll say a little bit more about that later on, if I remember to time myself properly. And that's something which I've been personally leading on. And I found it fantastic, because I've had this idea for ages that you could get kids to do more of the teaching in lessons. But because of the culture in the school and the structure, it actually gave me a vehicle to tell other people about it. It was already there. And now I've got other people on board, and it's getting, we're about to go into the 5th year of doing co-construction at KEGS. But the research-engaged sort of philosophy means that it's highly evaluative. We don't have to feel that you've got a perfect answer and we've sorted it and it's good or bad. It's always a journey of exploration, and it's useful. Talking texts is a one about reading aloud. We've done a lot of work on this, different ways. Kids reading aloud, getting parents to read aloud to their children at home. In year 7 and 8, some kids, reported they haven't had anyone read to them for years. And we found it in lessons, a lot of lessons, English lessons, languages lessons, history lessons, science lessons, reading aloud, getting, as celebrating that as a way of bringing ideas out into the open is a very powerful tool. So these are some of the top topics that we cover. So as a kind of how to kind of tip, if you want to set up a research engaged culture, a really important part of that, I would say, is to have a vehicle to share which is regularly done. And a lot of schools I know have started doing these things as well. The regular teaching and learning journal, which is shared, which lots of people can participate in. And crucially, everyone feels that they might be able to put something in if they wanted to. It doesn't just belong to the sort of the cliquey club over in the corner. And we need to, that's something which we need to work on always. Another way of sharing it is this. We have our basic structure is that we have a regular slot. We call them workshops. So the sort of the terminology at KEGS is workshops, which is just a sort of hangover from, I don't know, it doesn't really define what they are, but we use the word workshops. So you have your department meetings and you have workshops, and they're different. And sometimes they overlap, but very often they don't. So everyone is in a workshop. And it might be actually you work on your own or in a pair or with a group, and that's evolved over time. We used to be much more prescriptive and say, we have these groups and you have to be in one of them, and this is the theme. But now, as I'm learning to walk the talk of my rainforest philosophy, which I won't talk to you about now, is basically it's do what you want. You know? We've got workshop time on the calendar for you to do things that you want to do with each other, and that's how it works. And we just ask people to tell us what they're doing. This is the workshop time, just tell us what you're doing with it, that's all we ask. And that's really powerful, so people feel very empowered to form little groups. The physics department's going to work together this year on this. An English, maths and a science teacher are going to work together on this concept together because they've discussed it in the staff room. And of course it's a bit like Biddy No Mates, you know, people who just haven't found a friend, you know, we help facilitate into groups where that's an issue. And at the end we have this absolutely fantastic CPD event in May where the groups put all their stuff out and talk to it, we share, and it's a sort of 90-minute blast of sort of CPD kind of intensity, which is absolutely fantastic. It's the biggest buzz in the staff room and the canteen afterwards that you ever have the whole year. And what basically do is people spend time putting stuff out around various classrooms, and then we just walk about and talk to each other. There's no structure to it. There's no register or compulsion to be there. But everyone is just walking around, chatting, discussing, and this is what we've been doing. This is where we're at with our ideas. It's absolutely fantastic. But there is that sense that you do need to prepare for it. You know, when you're doing research, you're not just on your own. You know you are going to report it and share it, and and that focuses your mind when you're planning research, is that it's not just personal to you, it's going to be shared with other people. And we think that's important, and we're actually formalising that more. Because with our blog, we're actually going to put a mini report of every piece of this on it. So people will have to kind of get a summary, that idea that Ben talked about earlier about a summary of their findings. Everyone will have to produce that. Now the range of things that are included is quite extensive. And I've used the word explorations because I'm going to come on to whether it's research in a second. These are the sorts of things people that did in the last one. And this is about half of them. So philosophy and RE essays. This was about whether or not you could question spot the exam and really get types of questions sorted so that the students had encountered all the question types properly so that they could prepare the sorts of response at least one time before. So this was the thing about them working out that and then actually finding ways of mirroring the types of questions they might get in philosophy A-level and seeing if by doing that they would get better responses and so on, rather than always throwing students in with a different question style as well as a different question topic. And that was interesting. It sounds so obvious enough, but you know, they explored that. Economics, journal and blog site. This is a way of, a lot of students are very good at talking at my school, but getting them to actually go into the real depth. So by giving a public audience, here's a blog site where you have to write an economics article, like a journalistic style essay about this aspect of economics, and publish it for the class and for anyone else to see, was a real discipline for them. It was different from an essay. It was a public essay. So they had to up the stakes a bit, and the work they did was really amazing. The teacher was just, there were kids who wrote on that at a level which she'd never seen before. Physics, marking, this is just, I'm not going to go through them all. But this is just one where we're actually trying to find if we have a form of using a consistent format of giving formative assessment which the students act on, and having a way of logging whether the students have acted on the feedback that is given. So it's a classic sort of closing the gap marking strategy. So, and going on and on and on, you know, lots of different things. This is just a nice idea, exploring portraits in Year 7 art, where the students had to explore the work of an artist and then recreate the portrait in a photo. So we had sort of people sort of doing Picasso portraits of their mum by photographing them in a funny, and then in doing that, trying to understand the portrait, and then later, then that feeding into their painting. And it's just an idea an art teacher had, and did it work, and so on. So these are explorations, these are trials, and so on and so on. So they're all very different, and they're all a lot of them are very subject specific. And because they're constituted in this research engaged way, they're posed as questions and so on. And a lot of these things are really successful, but to be honest with you, some of them aren't. Some of them are a little bit lame, some of them are a little bit waffly, some of them are a little bit so what. Okay, you had fun doing that, but you know, did it make any difference? And that's a question we ask ourselves all the time. You know, what is the point of having a research engaged culture if it's just lots of serial trials which are just, you know, at the end of the day, well, you know, we did it, we had fun, it was engaging. Do we then build on that learning? Does it take us further? Now, actually, what we think is that we've been asking these questions. You know, if we're going to look at research and make this something which is properly informing our pedagogy at a fundamental level, we do need to have some nugget from this stuff which is retainable. It has to be something has to come out of it, which either tells us that something didn't work, or that it did, and therefore that's something we should continue to do. And even further, that's something which we should all do, or that maybe other people should try as well. This is where we're looking at it in a more rigorous way. But it's certainly, as a starting point, the very fact that everyone is engaged in a process is fantastic. So people are much more ready to accept the fact that there's some new ideas out there because they're already trying things out for themselves. So is it valid as research? Well, I think it is in the micro sense. I mean, for some teachers, the thing that they did themselves with their own class in that exact context, and they learnt from it in their own valuation of their own sense of the students and where they went, it's probably as close as you're going to get to them believing something to be true as anything which is done in a big trial, which is brought in and told to them as a truth. The fact that some of the people feel that this worked and they believe that, they have that sense, is a really powerful thing because they experience it. Now, you could say, yeah, but you think it worked because of all these reasons, and really it wasn't that, it was this, and that's all true. I'm a science teacher, so we teach this explicitly. You know, we talk about cause and effect, and you know, the idea of, you know, the classic thing of, you know, when it gets hot, water sales and ice cream sales will both increase, but ice cream sales don't increase because water sales increase. There's another cause underneath, which is common to both. And there's lots of things that we do in our school which could be the reason why things do go well, might be nothing to do with the research at all. And of course, we're aware of that. Is it research? Is it valid as research in a sense that we're talking about with an RCT, where you have some kind of truth which is generally true? No, and none of these things are set up in that way. So we haven't done that yet, but this is where we're at now. We have a research-engaged culture where we don't do random controlled trials yet, and we're looking at it. But does it have impact? See, I think it does, because we have quite a strong culture at my school where people will be very sceptical of initiatives, and in a way which I think is incredibly healthy. So that sort of initiative skepticism is strong. You know, when I give out the A-level points system, the ALPS report to my heads of department, the first thing they will do is just say, well, hang on, what's the methodology here, and is it valid? What's the maximum score I could have got if they'd all got A star? Because if it's, you know, and that's really healthy. So we have a data skepticism in my school, which is incredibly healthy, because we interrogate what the data means truly, rather than what it looks like. And that's part of the culture of query and challenge. And it's led us to, I think, a good place in terms of professionalism and professional responsibility, and actually secured much greater buy-in to a lot of initiatives which we have rolled out, because people have the opportunity to challenge them. So in impact terms, you know, we can look at that. Now, but there is another level, and this is where we're going now, because we do recognise that this kind of nice to do, fun but fluffy stuff, which is possible, perhaps isn't enough. You know, there's another level. And for the last several years, we've been a member of CamSTAR. It started in 2001. I'm not sure exactly when we joined, or if it was the very beginning, but we're certainly a very sort of solid member of the group now, and we're considering setting up kind of a hub of CamSTAR in Essex, based at my school. And it's a group of schools which are centred around Cambridge University, the education department at Cambridge, and it stands for Cambridge Schools, Teachers and Research. And for a number of years they've supported us in doing special research projects. And Professor Sue Brinley, who works there, comes to my school a couple of times a year and works with teachers one-to-one to help them design projects and to evaluate them. And their projects are at another level of rigour. Sometimes they go on to do MAs, sometimes they go on to do PhDs, but mostly it just informs practice in school. So this is where we're at. This is where it becomes a more rigorous methodology than the other things, and where we're trying to feed this into that now. So, when you're involved in a CamSTAR project, the first thing is that you have to have a question. And we found that that's really interesting. If you compare the CamSTAR projects with the general projects people would otherwise devise for themselves, where people can be sometimes task-focused, they might just say, we're going to be doing this activity and seeing how it works. What Sue and the people from Cambridge will be saying is, you need to turn that into a question. You know, what happens if we do this? What is a question you're trying to answer? And this is the real heart of it, methodology. Now, methodology, one of my colleagues did an MA a couple of years ago, actually in an English MA, and it was about reading as a precursor for writing. So, if you engage in dialogue about a question, does it improve the quality of writing? And she did extensive research into that. And the first section of her thesis was the methodology section. And I found that amazingly interesting. And in that, you know, there is validity in getting, because as a scientist, I've always been led to believe that the bigger the sample size, the better. You know, small sample size is basically rubbish. Well, actually, in social science terms, that's not necessarily true. Because if you're talking about one teacher in their context, and she is trying to learn about dialogue as a precursor for writing, what's really interesting and insightful is if she interviews 3 students intensively about the process all the way through. And that's what she did. So let's talk about your writing. Let's see some of your writing. Right, now let's do the dialogues. Let's see how that works. Let's get your feedback about how it felt doing the dialogues. Now let's see you do the writing. Let's see how it changed from before. What did you feel about the process? Do you think that the dialogue helped you improve your writing? All this sort of stuff. And they have different opinions. But the insight she gained from that process was rich and deep and, you know, interesting, far more than, say, if you aggregated that across hundreds of people and you had data. So sometimes in data you lose detail. One person's insight, one student's insight into the process can tell you more, sometimes, than the data. And you might think that's fluffy rubbish, but actually, or this whole thing about, I'll mention it in a second, the confirmation bias. I wanted that to be what they said, and so I value what that said. And that's always going to be the case. But anyway, it's a legitimate methodology. So, there are lots of different ways, questionnaires, surveys, and so on. So we discussed that. We look about how you know whether it's made a difference, and then we have a report. So, a CamSTAR project has a number of different forms of report, and it's usually a 1,500 word report or up to a 3,000 word report for a slightly different form. And this is some of the ones that we've had in the last year. So these are some of the projects people did as research CamSTAR projects at KEGS last year. So here we go, Edmodo. I mean, a lot of tech stuff gets thrown out there. A teacher wanted to actually evaluate whether Edmodo helped students learn French. So, and that was so she set up a methodology where they actually looked at and it was a collaborative learning aspect of it that they were interested in. So if students can collaborate on some French work through Edmodo, does it enhance their learning? Reading aloud, I've mentioned that once already. A drama teacher, again, a bit of tech stuff, wanted to find out whether using video capture of students of their practical work in drama and then giving the opportunity to play that back helped them meet the assessment criteria which was set by the exam board. So could they self-assess against the exam board criteria when they've watched themselves on the video? And that was interesting, you know, whether they could actually do that. You know, if they're watching themselves and they're looking at the criteria, can they match their performance to the criteria when they're watching themselves? Because if they can't do it when they're watching themselves, how can they do it when they're sort of just acting it out? You know, it's so interesting. So that was a really interesting trial. A maths teacher, flipped learning, which had very mixed. He basically, for him, he knocked flipped learning on the head after his trial because he did these webcasts. He did quite a few webcasts, so he did his own webcasts and set them as homework for kids to watch. And he actually found that there were very specific circumstances where students preferred them, which was when they were fairly low ability, relatively low ability, and where they'd already taught the stuff before anyway, because it just helped them go back over and reinforce some stuff they already knew. Or, slightly paradoxically, if it was absolutely brand new, and where the students could just almost watch him as if he'd never said anything about it before. So there was some specific, anyway, in his research, he basically thought, it's not worth me going to all that much trouble. So, you know, that was interesting. That is a good outcome. You know what, when all they're going, oh, this stuff works, it's already great. It's really healthy to have him in the mix. You know what, it's not that great, and that's really helpful. Just to give you another flavour, I'm sorry they're very small. I mean, an art teacher, Latin out loud. This was absolutely hilarious. I mean, Latin is not a spoken language, it's a written language, but the teacher wanted to see if you could do almost like MFL-style oral work in Latin as a way to help them understand the grammar structures, which is really interesting. And it's absolutely hilarious to go in there. It's all, you know, they actually are talking, they're sort of chatting in Latin in a slightly unrealistic way. The bottom one, though, I wanted to just, I don't know if we're going to read it, but this to me was really interesting. An MFL teacher, she wanted to know whether the grouping in different forms made a difference. So she had this idea, she was going to test it out. This is the closest we've come to a proper trial. And we're going to be looking at this more. And the interesting was that she learnt more about methodology than she did about teaching languages. So this is the thing. Mixed ability grouping, so she's got in her class, do I sit them in ability groups, high ability, middle, lower, whatever? Do I have mixed ability groups, each group mixed ability, or just teach them all on their own? And she did this thing where she did pre and post testing of certain topics. She thought as a fair test, she should keep to the same topic. And you might think this is laughable, but this is just, you know, she's an incredibly conscientious teacher trying to do the methodology. At the end of it, she worked out that they got better. The ones they did better on was the sequence that they'd done it in, because they were doing the same topic. So they got better at the structures. So they did the individual tests last, and they did better on that than the other ones, because that's the one they did last. And you're thinking, oh God, how bloody obvious is that? So she reported this, again, brilliantly honestly. You know, conclusion looks like working independently beats any form of group work. No, because I didn't randomise the sequence in which whether I did the test, whether they're mixed ability, blah, 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 blah. So like, great, isn't that interesting? So she's now thinking next time, we need to mix that up, we need to be conscious of that issue. Maybe it would have been better just doing a totally different topic or whatever, but it was just, you know, so she's trying to design a fair test, a rigorous scientific type test with her class, and it's actually not that easy. But she did get a lot out of it in terms of the group work issue, in terms of just that notion that actually group work versus working on your own is an important thing. You know, why do we get people to work in groups? And is it possibly true that they'd be better off doing this by themselves? It's something which is really interesting to consider. So, these are some of the methods that people have used. Pre and post test. And the question we've got there is, you know, is it a fair test, like I've just described? So, test something before, teach them loads of stuff, test them again afterwards, did they learn? And then you vary a variable in that about what you were doing, and you could start doing random controlled trials where some people get the thing and some people don't across the school. But the nature of the test is important, because you could get rubbish data if the testing isn't testing something which is the thing that you're after. Is the test result going to tell you what you want to know? So when I talk a little bit more about my co-construction, I don't care what the test results are. That's the thing. That's not the reason I'm doing it. So the thing I do it for can't be tested for. That's the interesting thing, which lets me off the hook, you could say. But actually, it's about my values that I'm imposing onto that situation are more important than the measurable outcomes. Questionnaires. Now, we've done some work on this, so people have done, with CamSTAR projects, questionnaires to find out the truth. But there's a whole science to questionnaire design and leading questions, and whether or not you have 5 things to choose from or 2 positives and 2 negatives and all of that. It's a minefield. So just saying, oh, we'll do a questionnaire isn't easy, because you can have a questionnaire. We do a staff questionnaire. There's sort of Ofsted-style parental survey questionnaires, which we just think are absolutely ridiculous, because they don't tell you anything. So if you ask a question like, does your child get a satisfactory amount of homework, and they say strongly agree or agree, what does that tell you? Nothing. They don't tell you, there's no nuance to that. It doesn't tell you whether the types of homework they like are good or bad or not. It's absolute garbage. You get all these averaged out survey responses which tell you nothing, that you can't act on the information. Are you happy at school? 12% say disagree. Who are they? You know, I don't know who these kids are. I don't know if that's true or what they mean by unhappy, or, you know, it's sometimes surveys are horrible because you think you're getting answers, but actually they just ask more questions and you just wish you hadn't even bothered. This is interesting, qualitative observation and evaluation. And I was really pleased to hear Ben say that in his thing this morning about that being important, because actually, you know, if you waste time trying to measure something in a quantitative way, you could be distorting the thing that you're trying to measure. When the qualitative evaluate, your sense of things is valuable. Has behaviour improved in this school? Yes or no? We might have data about exclusions or data about people being sent out of the room and things like that. But actually, the qualitative perception of the behaviour of the teachers is also really important. And you can't just knock it on the head and say it doesn't matter because, oh, well, you know, they always say it's worse than it was last year or whatever. Student interviews, these are really interesting. I mean, it's this thing, a bit like the dialogic teaching thing. The depth you get, you know, one interview just throws out stuff. It's so interesting to read just one interview with one kid, transcripted. And the teacher interviews. You know, confirmation bias is a real issue. You know, if you do a test, usually it's of something you want to be true. You're not going to waste all that time testing something you know is crap. This is a terrible strategy, but we're going to test it just to prove that it doesn't work. You never do that. You always test things you want to be true, and so you've got to be really careful to think, oh, God, you know, have you imposed that on in such a drastic way that you're just never going to listen to anything which says it didn't work? So that's really interesting. So the CamSTAR projects have been another level up from the general departmental or individual things where people have tried things out and report back. They added this sort of methodological stuff, and that's now included in the reporting of that. Let me just tell you a little bit about this one. How am I doing for time? I've lost sort of track. About 5 minutes, is that right? Yeah. I've been doing this thing called co-construction. This is my students when they were in year 10. And where basically we divided the class up into teams, and they taught various parts of the syllabus with me. They planned out the topics in advance, and some of them even, by the end of the course, had done a lesson-by-lesson plan of everything that we would learn. And this was a team when we were teaching forces, taught about 5 weeks of lessons with me. And they organised the practicals, they did the demonstrations, they taught the lesson, they did the equations, and they marked the books and gave the feedback and everything. I was in the corner, just having a cup of tea. The co is important because I sort of that slightly over exit, but it's at its best that's what was happening. And I'm about to launch a new one with my year 9s on Monday, where they are going to be teaching themselves physics and chemistry in year 9 for the whole year in teams, associated to different topics. And I have a tech team that will sort of post everything up on the internet and organise their homework and everything. And they all learn to do marking and assessment. It's fantastic. Now, at its best, these kids are, you know, they go to the prep room, they talk to the technicians, they come and tell me that so could you do that thing next lesson, because we think it would be really good if you explain that, because you better do it than us, and then we'll hand over and do the experiment. And they really take ownership of their learning in a huge way. People were nervous about this, and I said, no, I'm going to do it with a GCSE group for 2 years. It's a selective school. We did well. I got 22 students, 19 A stars, 2 A's and a B. So I'm really thrilled. It's the best results I've ever had from any class ever, way above the school average, the physics average. But hang on a minute, they got the same results in chemistry. So I'm kidding myself, it's now co-construction rocks. No, it doesn't. It was a fun process. It didn't do them any harm, but as someone once said to me on Twitter recently, yeah, but wearing lucky pants on the exam day doesn't do you any harm. Yeah, there's a bubble burst. Not doing any harm is no indication of success, obviously. So I'm thinking, it didn't do any harm. They did amazingly well. I could even stretch it to say the things that they learned may have even helped them with their chemistry. No, because a chemistry teacher is like a god to me, and she's just unbelievable. So, but they did better in physics and chemistry than they did on average for their other subjects. But the fact is that they did that well, and they got to do all this stuff. I almost don't really care about whether or not it mattered. You know, these kids taught themselves physics pretty much in some cases. Some of the topics that were on the exam we had only delivered in the co-constructed lessons. Yeah.
Would you also agree that they went away with extra skills for life?
Well, yeah. I mean, these guys were... I've written on my blog about one day when I couldn't take the lesson, and the students, I had an email exchange, and the students said, "Don't worry, sir, we've got it covered," and they did the whole lesson, and they did it. It's absolutely awesome. I mean, they learnt the confidence, you know, them, and they would do things like this. They'd be saying, you know, all right, guys, we're going to talk about specific heat capacity. In your pairs, discuss what you mean. And like, these are talking, they learnt how to do teaching. It's like teacher's school. It's fantastic. So they learnt tons of skills, which we didn't really measure or evaluate explicitly. But the fact is that to me, that was what I was after. Now, so this is where this is the last slide. When you're looking at action research, you've got to be careful about what you're looking for. Now, to me, and this is an overarching thing for this whole day, this middle thing here. Education is deeply value-driven. Now, you might think the most important thing there is the measurable outcome of a test in terms of assessment measurability, but actually, maybe it isn't. You know, maybe some of the things we're getting are just about the spirit, the feeling, the ethos of the learning environment, which is not measurable and is actually incredibly valuable. I don't know for a fact that co-construction experiment will have given them skills for life. I feel that it was true. I think that it was, and we certainly enjoyed doing it, and they seemed to be gaining a lot. I need to do more on that to try to evaluate the process more rigorously if I'm going to tell anyone else that this is the way to teach. That's the key. I'm never going to say to a single soul at my school or anywhere else, this works, therefore you must teach like this, because I have no proof of that whatsoever. All I know is that the students in that lesson, with me as their teacher, got a lot out of that process and that we valued it. That's very different from saying this works. And so that's really important. It might throw up the question that it might work, and it might suggest to other people that it might be something they might want to try. But like all those other things that people at my school have tried, they don't go around telling each other what to do as a consequence. That never happens, not in any department even. You know, the head of English, who's a big fan of dialogic teaching, shares his findings of it and models it, and people can go and watch him teach in a dialogic style anytime they like. But he would never tell them they should teach that way. Because that's the spirit of a research-engaged culture, where you have to allow people to bring it into their own space with their own values and make meaning from it. So this idea of a general truth, I value my experience of co-construction as a truth to me, that it's a valuable thing to do. But I wouldn't ever say that it's true that it works as a form of pedagogy. And that's the final question. You know, if it works for me, is that, you know, does that count? And there's no simple answer to that. You know, I could say lots of things that I have evaluated myself work for me when I'm acting in a research-engaged way. is what we're talking about today bigger than that? I think people are sort of suggesting that there might be some bigger truths out there that are more common. But I actually think that if every teacher acted in this way for themselves, we'd get further than if we were looking for the master of the universe. This is the line, the answer 42. Pedagogy is this. I don't think we're ever going to find that. I don't think it exists, personally. So I think we could waste a lot of energy looking for universal truths when we'd be better off finding personal truths that exist in our context. So for me, action research which creates that is valuable, and that's what we should be trying to do. Okay, thank you very much.